All right. And just to make sure I got it right, Dan Talbot. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
That's right. Yeah. And
Okay.
I've got a
It's
little box. I've got to click got it, do I? Or
yeah, just hit okay or whatever.
yeah, yep, there we go. Yep.
Great. All right, let's go over to the intro that I have for you. And all right, here we go in 3 seconds. Good to have you here, Dan. Let's do it in 3 seconds. All right, three things I know I have in common with today's guest, Dan Talbot. He is our guest today, and it's a special guest because he is all the way on the other side of the world in Western Australia. So here are the three things. Love of classic Mustangs. I know that from checking out his Instagram feed and from the messages that I'm hearing from him. His love of motorcycles. Now, he's a lot more familiar with the actual mechanics of the motorcycle. I just love getting on them and riding them. And the love of our cats. Now, I see that he's got a cat called Macavity. Is that right? Is it Macavity?
Yep.
It,
After the character in the musical Cats, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical
there you
Cats.
go. I wasn't sure if there was a connection there. So
Yeah.
he can be seen chilling while Dan works on his machines. And also, there's no cooler sight than seeing a 1966 Classic Mustang trailing a 1921 Model T. Now, we're going to talk about all things machines from Western Australia. As I said before, welcome, Dan, to Ford Mustang, the Early Years podcast.
Thank you, Doug. Great to be here.
I am happy to have you here, and I loved even before I hit record. The first thing you said was when I asked you where you were from, and you said Western Australia, and I was trying to. I'm not real good with geography, but you said it's about 200 kilometers away from Perth, and I said, oh, I know a guy in Perth, George from Bang and Headlights, and he said, yeah, I connected with George and his company because of listening to the podcast, showing that podcasting actually does work. So I love that. I love that. So where do we start? You have so many interesting things in your past. Is this all you do? Is all you do is work on your cars and your machines and things, or do you actually work for a living?
I've just retired after 37 years with the West Australia Police. So I still don't really have much time for working on cars. I'm just finalising a PhD at the moment. So I'm in the closing stages of that. So
Oh my
that's sort of
gosh.
consuming me. But where do we start? You touched on motorcycles, and motorcycles are my first great love. Um, but yeah, cars are also right up there. And some years ago, my stepson purchased, well, they called it in Australia, they called it a Godzilla. It was a Nissan GTR, twin turbo, 4-wheel drive, really powerful motor vehicle. He was only in his early 20s at the time, and he hocked himself tremendously to get it. And
Right.
within a few months of owning the car, he'd blown the engine up from doing his launch starts and so on. And it was going to cost us just as much to rebuild the engine as it was that he'd purchased the car for. So I said to him, I've always wanted a Mustang, and maybe we'll buy a Mustang and be like a father stepson project. You can drive it, we'll work on it, and then when you get back on your feet, I'll take the Mustang over. And he said, yeah, great, what a great idea. And we started looking online at cars for sale, and he's going, oh, these are all automatic, because the young guys over here just
Right.
love their manual stick shift,
Sure.
as you call them. And I said, yeah, well, they're automatic. They come from America, and most American cars are automatic. So, okay. And he says, have they got air conditioning? And I said, no, they don't have air conditioning. They're 50 years old. And in the end, he goes, oh, yeah, I don't think so. And then I was a little bit dejected. And his mother said, well, if you've always wanted one, just get one anyway. So we did. And I probably bought the worst Mustang in Australia. And we'll get onto that, I'm sure. But it was just a mess. Every panel was rusted. And it goes back to the days of when you crashed a car and panel beaters used to knock the dents out, fill the car with body filler or
Hmm.
Bondo, as you call it, and paint over it. And this car had body filler that was half an inch thick, even thicker in
Oh my
places.
gosh.
So it was a really, really poor state of repair. But it was very rare as well, which I'm sure you want to talk about. But it
Well,
was a
I want to, and that's a great story of your introduction to the Mustang world. I want to talk for a moment. You shared some things in your guest application that I was not even aware of. That Ford was going to introduce to every dealership. I think 430 dealerships in Australia. They were going to introduce at least one Mustang, and around the number 200 they gave up. Do you know a little bit more about the story? Because I'm really interested in hearing more, and I'm sure our listeners and our community would love to know more too.
yeah. The story, there's a few different versions of the story, but the one that seems to be the most prominent is the fact that Australia were releasing a new Australian-built Ford Falcon, and as they test these things out with the buying public, and the buying public weren't warming to it, so they had to come up with a strategy, an advertising strategy, and the strategy was they were going to advertise it as the Mustang bred Falcon, with the idea of putting a Mustang in every one of the 430 dealerships throughout Australia, or might have even been 432 or 435,
Hmm.
but they started importing them, and they were told it would be really quite easy, or relatively easy, exercise in converting from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. And for each car they imported, they brought in a spare dashboard to convert the dashboard over ahead of the rest of the conversion. And they Ford Australia hired a shed next to the assembly plant, the Homebush Ford assembly plant in Sydney, and brought these old Ford guys out of retirement to do these conversions. And it was just hideous. The conversion was dreadful. They used the wrong steering box, so they hammered big dents into the shock tower and into the chassis rail so the steering box would fit in. The geometry was all wrong. But nevertheless, they were so popular. They just as soon as one hit the floor, they were snapped up. They were purchased. So the idea of having them on the floor of the dealership, I don't think that worked out so well. But
So my understanding just from the story that you share right now, and again, I don't know any of this to be the reality of how the cars were introduced, but it wasn't the fact that it wasn't a popular car. It was just the mechanics of it made it so challenging to convert them to right-hand drive. It sounds like that was the deal.
that is there. Yeah, that was the big deal, all right. And yeah, when they got to 400, 200 odd, they just thought, no, this is too hard and probably too expensive, Doug. That would be the main reason, I'm sure. Yeah.
Totally understand. Now, was your vehicle? Now you have a '66 coupe, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Was your
Yes.
vehicle one of the 200, or was this a car that has since come in?
No, it's one of the 200. It's one of and it actually, my vehicle came with a Ford Australia compliance plate. So all of this, they had a compliance plate similar to a Falcon over here. So yeah, it's been confirmed as one of the 200. Yes,
Nice,
so it's
nice. So you
very
actually
rare.
have
So,
a very rare car on your hands. So when you lifted open the hood and you could see the ball peen hammer dents in the side of the shock tower, were you able to actually physically see some of the damage that was created by the engineering team that was going through the conversion?
you probably need to be shown. It's right down the bottom where the steering box is. So I would need to show you, but you just put your hand down there and you can feel it. I've retained it because, as you see, I did that full nut bolt restoration. So it was taken, sandblasted right back to the bare metal. And the chap that was doing the body work for me said, "Oh, we'll get rid of those dents." I said, "No, Jordan, no, we need to keep them because they are the original hammer marks of the engineers." And I use that in quotes, but the engineers from 1966 and 67 back when they first bought those cars, and we need those in there. I did actually put a steering rack in the car because it was so awful to steer, but I've got all the original stuff sitting under my bench at home. So one day someone will want to take that car back to how it was when it
Incredible.
came out of the Ford factory. Yeah.
Incredible. So I know that there's a full laundry list of repairs and restorations that you have made to the car. So maybe can you share a little bit about that, and then I'd love to just chat with your love about your love of machines in general after that, because I know that is a love of yours for sure.
Yeah, well, sure, Doug. It started, the transmission was really sloppy. So I thought, well, let's fix the transmission. So I pulled the transmission out, crushed my hand while I was doing it, by the way. But anyway, that's another
Jeez.
story. It fell off the jack as I was lowering it. But yeah, so the transmission's out, and the engine looked hideous. So well, let's pull that out and give it a clean up. And then it just snowballed from there. And I thought, well, the car's half stripped as it is. So I just continued pulling it apart and eventually took it off to be sandblasted. And what the sandblasting revealed, once you get all the body filler and all the paint off, the car was just in dreadful shape. And Joe, the panel beater, or what would you call him? We'll call him a panel beater. That's what we call them over here in Australia.
Body shop guy, body shop.
Yeah, body shop guy. Yeah. He said, you have to make a decision on whether you abandon this car or whether you fix it. So I was already $20,000 into the car, or
Oh my gosh.
22,000,
Yeah.
and which is a lot more in American dollars. It's probably around 25 US dollars. So I was already quite a way into the car, and to rebuild it was going to cost twice that. So I said, no, let's punch on. I didn't know where the money was coming from, but we boxed on anyway. And just the first thing was you secure the car, you weld it to a massive big frame, take all the measurements. So as you cut the panels off, the body doesn't distort. And the first one to come out was the floor. Pulled the floor out, welded the new floor in, and then started at the rear end. Everything came off the rear end, all the body panels, the tubs, everything. It was just so far gone, we just couldn't save any of it. That all got replaced, the quarter panels, the boot, the tail light panel.
So you pretty much had you've built a car. I mean, you didn't, you didn't restore any of those parts. You got rid of them and got new ones. It sounded. Or did you go back to the quarter panels and actually put new metal in, or did you completely put new metal in?
Yeah, new metal everywhere. Doug, as we're sitting in front of the computer, Joe would look at the price of a new bonnet and say, I can't fix yours for that, click. The new doors, can't fix yours for that price, click. New boot, trunk as you call it, can't fix that, yours for that price. And we just kept buying and buying and buying. And even what happens with the old Mustangs is where the water, you got that little grill in front of your wipers.
The cowl.
Yeah, the water goes into the cowl. That was all rotted away. So new cowl, upper and lower cowl, new radiator piece at the front that holds a radiator. Someone at some stage had put a different radiator in the car instead of getting the original one from America. They just put something else in there and just cut the sides of the radiator thing and drilled the holes and mounted it. Yeah, it was a really rough job. But
so were you able to retain the original engine or transmission, or did you rebuild those?
Oh, that's another long story.
Yeah, we got time. I want to hear it. I know my community is interested. They are now invested in this story.
Yeah. So the original engine was the 289 C4. All of these cars that were brought into Australia back then were 289 V8 C4 transmission. That's the automatic 3-speed. So I still have a C4 3-speed in it. However, I really would like to put an overdrive in because at the moment I'm using up far too much fuel and I'm a little bit restricted. I feel like I'm just driving around locally and I want to get out on the road. And every time I go out on the open road, the car's revving at 3,000 revs at 60 mile an hour. And it's just, I just not really enjoying it. So future plans are overdrive transmission. The engine, I pulled the 289 out and I should have stuck with it, but a 302, a roller cam 302, which was the last incarnation of the Windsor engine, came up, and I was told it was refurbished, which I took to be rebuilt, and I picked that engine up, and it wasn't. I had to rebuild the whole engine, so was another costly exercise.
You could have just rebuilt the 289 for probably the same price as rebuilding the 302.
But I do now have a nice smooth roller cam 302, and it is a pretty nice engine. So. And
what did you end up putting on for wheels? Did you use the original 15s, or did you you put a bigger wheel on?
I've got 15s. I think the originals were 14. So
14, sorry, 14s, right?
Yeah. So I went for the Magnum 500, I think they call them.
Yeah, I've been looking at those. I'm like, because I have the wire hubcaps on my 65, and I so badly want to get those Magnum 500s. I saw that a bunch of people in my community have recommended that I get them. I just haven't pulled the trigger. They're expensive, so it's just one of those things where, gosh, if I want to put over $1,000 into it, I guess that's the direction to go.
Well, and the problem, Doug, is I live from where I'm sitting. The beach is about 200 meters away, and salt water is a killer here. And the chrome wheels that I've put on, the chrome Magnum wheels, are starting to be affected by rust. Little bits of rust is showing through. However, there is an alloy version that you can get, so I would recommend, if you do, maybe look at getting the alloy ones.
I'm not quite as close to the beach as you are, but I am about 20 minutes away from the Pacific Ocean, and I just pull on the trigger. It's just, even with a great sponsor, we have a sponsor for the show, National Parts Depot. They have given me some great prices on things, and I just haven't pulled the trigger yet. There's too many other projects that I keep saying, gosh, I'm going to spend over $1,000 and then put tires on top of that on it, then
Mm.
I want to put that money into I don't know, something else within the car. But
Mm.
okay, so you put a new engine in, you rebuilt the tran, you rebuilt the tran. Is that what I heard you say?
I put a rebuilt transmission in, yeah.
Rebuilt transmission. You probably had
Mm.
to change the entire cooling system in the
New
car because
radiator, yeah,
right, new
yeah, yeah.
radiator. Did you do a whole new wire harness also?
Yes, brand new.
Oh gosh,
Oh, was it painless wiring harness? Yes,
was
yeah.
it painless?
Actually, it was. It went in really well. It's all each wire has a little the name of where it's going. It was a great harness. I highly recommend it.
You redid the entire dash, all the dash instruments and bezel and all of that as well.
Yeah. And there's another
Repainted.
thing.
Yeah.
When I pulled the old dash pad off, the engineers had written in a Sharpie what where each switch is positioned on the dash. They'd written lights, and that was still had been preserved under there. We lost that in the sandblasting, which I was quite disappointed with.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, yeah.
Amazing, amazing. New gas tank. I would assume you put a new gas tank in
Oh,
it as well.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Very
so
important.
new
Yeah.
gas tank. Did you have to do new torque box? Wait, I forget if the coupe does the coupe have torque boxes or no? Because I know the convertibles do.
It doesn't have torque boxes, Doug, but what we did, the you had the front chassis rails come down and they stop on the floor where a torque box would start, but they just stop and they're welded to the floor. And then the rear ones start under the passenger seat. And someone in America was making what they called connector rails. So it's just a bit of pressed steel and it connects the front rail to the rear and you just weld it along the floor and it tightens everything up. So they were just two lengths of about three foot bend folded steel, mild steel, and we weld them in. It was about an hour's work to weld them into the car, and it really tightens the whole chassis up. I highly recommend those too. If anyone, you need to be on
So
a rotisserie to do that. However,
So yeah, I was going to say, so it sounds like it's a pretty sophisticated restoration that you had done, nut and bolt restoration. Is there anything that you wouldn't feel comfortable doing yourself that you left to somebody else? Even the painting, did you do that yourself too, or did somebody else come in to do that?
no, I wasn't allowed to do that. I worked with Joe. I cut all the body panels off and would fit them up, and Joe would do the welding because my welding is dreadful. And then there's a bit of a warning to your listeners. A lot of the panels we bought were made in Thailand and around the
Hmm.
world, and they were just really dreadful pressings. And it was so disappointing that you spend all this money and someone in a factory somewhere in Asia are making pressings, and you think they would get it right, but they're not. They're churning out these things that we had to modify to make them fit to the car.
Oh wow.
So Joe would weld them on, and then I got to do all the sanding. But there comes a time a point where you're starting to get close to the top coat, and Joe said, "No, well, the experts need to do the rest by hand." And then the spray painter came in and did a lovely coat of Wimbledon white over the top of the car. Yeah, so I don't have the skills to do a coat of paint like that. And also the engine rebuild, once you get into the depths of the engine, I also don't have the skills to do that. So
Incredible
I,
though that the undertaking was one of those things where you said, "Well, I want a 66. I'm just going to give this thing a try." And many people. I started in the category of I don't want to go any further than washing and drying my car. Fortunately, I bought in addition to the '65 Mustang. Just last year, I bought a '67 F-250 pickup truck that was in a lot more challenged position than my Mustang, and I'm not scared to do the repairs to the F-250, but I am a little worried about doing. I was a little worried to do the repairs for the '65 Mustang, but the confidence that I have been built that I've built doing the truck has really enabled me to get back into the Mustang and start to think about some of those other repairs that I would say, nah, I'm just going to let somebody else do it. I don't want to screw it up. But you dove right in head first. Is that? I know that you're a machine guy, and it sounds like you probably have been dealing with machines your entire life. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I grew up on a farm. In the US, you'd call it a ranch. I grew up on a beef farm, not far from where I live now, and we were just born to machinery. It's there. motorcycles. We don't use horses over here. We use motorcycles to round the cattle up with.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's always about motorcycles and cars for me. They were my love. I used to race motorcycles. I still do occasionally. So yeah, it was all growing up. Cars, motorcycles had a big part of my life, and Mustangs were. There was just this amazing attraction to them for a young teenager from Australia. And whenever we went to the capital city, I'd be on the lookout for Mustangs, and a successful trip to the capital city, I'd spot a Mustang. So the love was always there. Sadly, I was sort of in my late 40s by the time I took the plunge to buy my first one. But I'm there now, and I've got it, and it's just an amazing car, and I love driving it.
I'm with you though. I was over 50 when I bought my Mustang, and that was the first classic car that I had. And I've always had a love of classic cars, but always concerned about, number one, the expense. I had no idea how actually attainable these cars were. I mean, you could still pick up a coupe, and I think you still could probably pick up a coupe for under $20,000, and that's relatively inexpensive as it relates to automobiles. Now, it's not inexpensive as it relates to hobbies in general, but just as an automobile itself.
Mm.
But I also noticed that you go way back with vintage on motorcycles and your cars too. I see that you have either you've done some rebuilding of, and is it Ariel? Is that how you pronounce that?
Aerial motorcycles, yes.
What year is that? It's an early 1900s something, isn't it?
No, the aerial that I'm rebuilding at the moment is a 1939. And you mentioned at the start of the podcast, you mentioned about the 1921 Model T that I had on the back of the car.
Yeah.
That was a racing car that we built for, they call it the Red Dust Revival, which is...
I saw you with the mask. You have the
the
outline of the mask, and your face is all clayed up.
Yeah. So was the first racetrack in Western Australia, and it's out in the goldfields. So we built the car for that and had a great time, got covered in red dust, as the name would suggest. So next time I go back, which will be in a couple of years, because it's only every 3 years, I'll go back with a motorcycle, but it has to be pre-war. Hence, I've got a 1939 that I'm building. So got a bit of time to do that.
Yeah, that's a great. I don't know if you can see that. I put up on video a picture of you with your red face. And those of you that want to check this out on the YouTube channel, you can just go over to Mustang Podcast on YouTube and see a picture of Dan's face that he's got mostly clay all over his face. It's a great photo. You have a lot of great machines that you have on your Instagram page. I mean, everything from these vintage motorcycles that I was showing to the old time automobiles that are in there, and of course the shot of your 66 pulling, what is that, a 1921 Model T?
It is a 1921 Model T with a body that was salvaged from a 1922 Aston Martin. It's a long story there. We don't have enough time for that, I'm sure, but the Model T is all just standard running gear, and that body was put on the Aston after the war because they'd used the alloy for the war effort. So someone built that steel body, and it was discarded in the 80s, and it was just lying around since 1981 or 82. So my friend put it on the T.
Well, just looking at, I'm going through Dan's Instagram page as he is chatting here about his Model T. I'm just looking at, I got stuck on the 66 because just the stance on that alone, it's got a little bit higher lift on the back, a little bit lower lift on the front, and it's just beautiful. It really just is in exquisite shape. Inside, I haven't seen the inside, but I'm assuming that the inside is just as nice as the outside.
It is, Doug, and I stuck with the original, the red and white pony trim, and the red and white contrasts with the car perfectly. It's just amazing. The stance, I don't think we discussed what I did to the front end. I used RRS steering rack and coilover suspension with slightly bigger brakes. The brakes are 1 inch bigger in diameter. So the coilover allow you to adjust the front end up and down within, it's very, very easy to do. So, and the steering rack, I may have made a bit of a mistake there. I went for a manual steering rack. I should have used a power steering rack because it's just, when you're maneuvering the car at low speed, it's really quite hard work. So
and I also,
future job.
Also notice on the front end, you've used a pair of our friends, your friend and my George from Red Bangin' Headlights. You have his
Yeah.
headlights on the front of your car, which is terrific.
Yes, and Doug, one thing we do have a problem with over here are kangaroos. Very seldom will I ride a motorcycle around these roads at night, and I'm really careful about driving the car because the roos just jump out in front of you and they do a lot of damage when you hit one. It's like hitting a human. They're massive, big things. So you want to be able to see where you're going. You want to see the road ahead, and even at night, I'd only drive maximum 50 mph because I don't want to hit anything, not even a possum, let alone a roo. So yeah, and
No,
those
I
headlights help.
completely understand it. And those headlights definitely illuminate the road. Thank you, George, for being a valuable supporter of the show and just an all around good guy as well. So, Dan, tell me a little bit about your experience with the Mustang community in Western Australia. Is it a community that's as tight and together as they are, or as you may have heard in the States, or is it are you finding that you're a little bit running solo in the Mustang world over there?
No, not at all. It is a great community, and not necessarily the Mustang community. I just taught the classic car community. Um, it's heavily influenced by the US muscle car culture. The people I mix with, anyway. We have cars and coffee events similar to what you have over there, and 3/4 of the what turns up there are US muscle cars. I actually did quite like the idea of a Corvette as well because my first car was a Chev, but I told you the reasons why I picked the Mustang, but there's a lot of Corvettes here, um, probably because of the fiberglass, they don't rust so readily. There's a lot of Camaros and oodles of Mustangs. And
Hmm.
people are still importing them. However, it's getting really quite difficult to bring cars into Australia now because you have to meet asbestos requirements, which means the cars that have to be pulled apart and any hint of asbestos has to be removed. And the dollar as well, that
Oh
our
yeah.
dollar has sunk quite a bit compared to yours. When I bought the car, we were on parity and I was buying parts out of the US, but you just hand over fist and getting some really great deals. But now it's not so good. So
So do me a favor, draw a straight line, if you would, from I'm trying to connect the dots with your childhood to where you are now. You grew up on a farm, were a
mhm.
farm boy, I guess we could call you.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
became a police officer. Now you're doing your PhD. How does that? Those don't even compute. Those three things don't necessarily fit together. So help me design your history.
I actually did. I did skip a career. I left school very young and did an electrician apprenticeship,
Okay.
and then went to the offshore oil industry.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. So when you're working offshore, you're spending half your life on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. So I did that for about 6 years, and then I thought, well, that's not working out for me, and I joined the police, which was a great career. I've had a wonderful career as a police officer. The PhD is in criminology,
Mm.
so it's just an extension and should lead into some further work in research. In fact, I am actually about to commence a research project into post-traumatic stress disorder in police officers. So that is project is about to launch. So that's where I'm at the moment. I've retired. I've been retired now for about 3 months. So
Wow,
yeah,
congratulations.
and
That's great. And it sounds like you have your hands full not only with your PhD but with all of your vehicles too. Now, so what do you have in your garage right now? Like what are the machines that you're working on now?
that one of the machines we're working on is my wife's 38 Chevy truck that's for her business. She's a honey producer, and we've got the little truck. Um, that is an old and slow truck. It heads on down the highway at 60 kilometers, what's that? 40
Well, let's
mile an
see.
hour, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
yeah,
100 is 55, so I just do the
yeah,
math backwards.
yeah. So it's very, very slow, and it's actually a liability out on the highway. So we need to put a bigger engine and transmission in that. So that's in the shed waiting for a bit of work. I'm working on the 39 aerial for the Red Dust Revival. I'm also finishing off a rebuild on a 1971 BSA Rocket 3,
Hmm.
which was an amazing bike. Um, I've got an aerial square four for sale at the moment. Any
Nice.
listeners want a
If
nice,
anybody,
tidy
if
square four?
anybody is in either Australia at any spot or wants to import it to the U.S., I'll get you in touch with Dan. Just reach out to me.
Yeah, I've just got a bunch of other bikes in there. I've got a Vincent Rapide, the 1948 Vincent Rapide, which is a very exclusive, quite collectible motorcycle, and a modern Norton, which is part of the Norton release. That, in fact, an American by the name of Kenny Dreer was very influential in the re-release of those motorcycles. If it wasn't for Kenny Dreer, that probably wouldn't have taken place. But anyway, that's another long story. And
Fascinating,
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
We have enough material to bring you back a second time. I definitely want to chat with you even more. So what do you drive on a daily basis? What do you take around to go shopping?
just a Toyota Hilux. We need that for the beekeeping to get through the paddocks and the creeks and stuff. So yeah, I did actually to get to and from work. I wanted a big, comfortable car, so I had a Chrysler 300
Hmm.
yeah, with the 6.4 liter Hemi. And then when I retired, we sold it and we're driving the Hilux, which is less economical than the Chrysler. We should have kept the Chrysler.
What's the American version of the Hilux? Is that like the Highlander?
Well, it's a four-wheel drive Toyota Ute, or a small, very small truck. It's just a four-cylinder turbo diesel. I don't know what you'd call it. I thought
I'll have to
it was
look
a
it up because
Hilux.
we
Yeah.
don't have I don't know that we have a version of unless it's like the RAV4. That might be the
Oh,
version
it's
of
bigger
the.
than a RAV4. It's slightly smaller than sits between like a RAV4 and a Land Cruiser. It's a bit smaller than a Land Cruiser.
So in the US, we go from the RAV4, and I think the next step up from that is the Highlander, and then it goes to the Land Cruiser from there. I think, if I remember correctly, and I'm sure I'll
Yeah.
get a whole bunch of emails saying you don't know what the hell you're talking about, Doug. Oftentimes that is the case with but I have a 2011 Highlander, and I love that car.
Mm.
It's 13 years old or 12 years old, and I feel like every time I get in it, it's still like a brand new car to me. I
Yeah, that's what Toyotas are like. Yeah, I'm sure it's a Highlander because it sits between the RAV4 and the Land Cruiser. It's a 2.3 or 2.6 liter diesel four,
Oh,
turbocharged
diesel,
though.
diesel.
Yeah,
Okay, turbo diesel. Okay, yeah,
yeah.
mine's they made them in the in a six-cylinder gas or a six-cylinder hybrid here. I don't think there was a turbo version of the Highlander.
Mm.
Again, I could be completely wrong, but I think that was the case. Dan, you are a fascinating guy. I appreciate your service in the police force. That sounds like that was a very rewarding career for you, and I admire you for what you've accomplished in the machine world as well. So thanks for sharing all of your inspiration and your message on the show today. Any final words of wisdom that you could share to anybody in our community looking to get into a car maybe that's out of the junkyard, but they want to be able to go full nut and bolt restoration? What advice would you give to
That I'm a bit ambivalent there, Doug, because
them?
if I took a panel beater or a body guy to look at the car with me, he would have talked me out of it. He would have said, "Don't buy this car because
Correct.
it's just a mess." But I wouldn't have purchased a very rare car and got it back on the road. So it's a piece of Australian motoring history. So I'm really pleased with it. So I bought with my heart, not my head.
Understood.
Maybe use your head a little more than I did.
There you go. That's the quote. Use your head a little bit more than Dan did. Dan, thank you for sharing your message on the show today, and I know we'll get a lot of positive feedback from the episode today. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Doug.
Hey,
Thank you.
Ford Mustang community, thanks for hanging out with us another week. Thank you so much to National Parts Depot for sponsoring the episode. And this in January, or actually in December, they started sponsoring the show. Thank you, National Parts Depot, for all of the parts and your support of the show. Very much appreciate you. For all those that are listening, keep it safe, keep it rolling, and keep it on the road. Until next time.